Welcome to another episode of Well-Adjusted Mama. This is a podcast dedicated to educating and empowering women from preconception, pregnancy, birth, and through early motherhood on wellness lifestyle. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Brayton, and I'm a maternity pediatric chiropractor and mother who has hand-selected experts in natural holistic healthcare specialties to shine light on options and choices during this exciting phase of a woman's life. And today's episode is all about navigating the fourth trimester, which I think is a topic that is highly under discussed. And the more we can talk about this prior to the birth of baby, the more the whole family unit can be prepared and adept at managing the new challenges that come along with a newborn baby and recovering from birth. So today's guest is Colleen Goidel. She's the co-founder of Two Doulas You, an Atlanta-based doula collective offering consistent, continuous, compassionate support from pregnancy through postpartum. Her team-based approach ensures that clients receive more attention, flexible scheduling options, and timely support as their journey unfolds. She's a retired labor doula, a CAPPA-certified postpartum doula, a CAPPA-certified lactation educator, and a birthing from within certified childbirth educator, and a postpartum newborn care educator. She has developed a full spectrum of virtual and local in-person education offerings for expectant parents that includes comprehensive childbirth, lactation, and newborn care classes. Colleen has 2 grown children and 4 grandchildren and lives in Hoboken, New Jersey. For more information, check out her website at twodoulasyu.com. Hi, Colleen. Welcome to the show. I'm very excited to have you on today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So today's topic is navigating the fourth trimester. And this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. I see a lot of new dyads in my practice. And I know how special this time is and also how vulnerable and intense also it can be. And also going through the experience myself. And so I'm excited to cover this topic about what that means and also your expertise kind of around how to support the entire family during that fourth trimester. So talk a little bit about who you are and why you're so passionate about this topic.
Yeah, so I am a retired labor doula and an active postpartum doula. And I've been doing this work for about a dozen years. It was a career change for me in right around age 50. I have 2 grown children and I have 4 grandchildren. And I've always been drawn to babies and birth and all of the things that kind of come along with that. And, you know, I had my own struggles when I was a young mother. So I can't think of anything more rewarding for at least for me to do than to support other parents moving into this, as you said, very vulnerable and very hormonal stage, and also being in charge of keeping a newborn thriving. So that's a lot. And I love going into my clients' homes and helping them find their way and eventually working myself out of a job. That's really the goal of a good postpartum doula, right? It's not to take over necessarily. It's to help parents, new parents, figure out how to connect with their babies, how to soothe their babies, how to take care of themselves, so that eventually they feel like, well, you know, I still don't have all the answers, and I probably never will, but I can do this, right?
That's the empowerment piece, right? And that's where when you educate, you empower, you teach, then the parents and baby have the skills that are required to thrive.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's talk about like what does the fourth trimester look like and what are you teaching when you go into this new family's home as a postpartum doula?
Yeah. So I think it's really helpful to look at birth and the first month or so from the baby's standpoint, right? Babies are in this perfect environment in the womb where all their needs are met. They don't have to do anything. They're fed, they're comfortable, they're able to grow, and then they're suddenly thrust into a very different world, and it's a very rude awakening. Um, Everything is foreign. They cry because it's hard to be in the world and they want to be back in the womb. And, birthing in a hospital, which of course is where most folks give birth, can make that transition even harder because of the safety and risk related rules and protocols around birth. So babies are thrust into this intense, completely foreign world without any skills to cope with it. And when new parents can look at their baby through that lens, they may have more compassion for their crying baby, for their baby who won't go to sleep without them, for their baby who, doesn't understand the difference between night and day, and also more compassion for themselves. It's not that they're doing something wrong. It's just that it's really hard for newborns to be in the world. And our job as new parents is to help them transition, help them cope until they're able to function more independently on their own.
Right. That is such an interesting perspective to think about how different the environment is in utero versus out of utero. And there's a shock to the system, so to speak. I mean, what I see a lot is the actual birth process and how that can be shocking to the baby's nervous system, right? But there's also that reflection of just going from this completely different environment and having no understanding about what the outside world looks like, right? Everything is brand new.
I mean, even gravity is foreign, right? They don't know what to do with their arms. They don't, we have decided in our culture that it's safest for infants to sleep on their back. Well, that makes their arms flail and they feel like they're falling. So no wonder every time we go to change a newborn or put them on their back, unless they're swaddled or held tightly, they struggle with just sort of having, a sense of balance and a sense of their bodies in space. I always say that, even with like breastfeeding, for example, we have to hold them very tightly and closely because it's like trying to eat a sandwich while riding a skateboard. They have no sense of their bodies in space. Gravity is foreign. And then you add in all the other things like things in the air, right? So sensitivity to things in the air, lights, sounds. Certainly the womb is loud, right? We know that the womb is loud and that white noise sound and the movement in it is very soothing to babies. So those kinds of things aren't necessarily as foreign, but the just lights and television and media and all the things that are going on around us, babies have no way to cope with that. And so our job is to help them transition. And when we look at it from that aspect, maybe we can be a little gentler with ourselves about how it's going. Because, I don't know a parent who has ever said, oh, yeah, that first month it was a breeze, right?
It's not. And that's okay. That's not the point, right? But so with that perspective, how can parents better manage that fourth trimester and support their babies with the adjustment?
Right. I think one thing that's really helpful is having conversations with either their birth partners or the folks who are going to be supporting them, having an honest conversation about what are you comfortable doing? What are you fearful about caring for a newborn? And figuring out sort of where those holes are and filling them with education, maybe hiring some professional help, lining up family and friends. And of course, that can be problematic if they are family and friends who may have agendas or may be judgmental, maybe carrying their own emotional baggage about birth and how to raise a baby and how to care for a newborn. So they can bring sometimes more stress into the picture than help, right? So
It's true. You have to really, really clear with boundaries.
yeah, and I like to tell folks, parenting is the ultimate adulting, and it starts
It is.
because this is where you have to set boundaries about what doesn't feel right for you. And a lot of that is kind of an intuitive sense of, is this something I am comfortable having happen around my baby? Right. Um,
Right.
Besides gathering information and hiring help if needed and arranging for help and figuring out who your allies are, tuning into that intuitive voice that can provide information on what you and your baby need can be a big source of help as well. Our intuition is never stronger than when we've grown a baby, birthed a baby, and are spending 24/7 with a baby. And
That's right.
most new parents don't feel like experts at their baby in the beginning. But when they can tune into that inner voice and listen within, take that into consideration along with the knowledge and the medical care and all the other things that are coming at them in terms of advice and information, they can figure out what's right for them. Because every baby is different and every family is different, and what is sustainable for each family is different as well.
Well said. And I will say what I find that it's easiest to be in touch with your intuition when you, as a woman, especially when you practice self-care and you're not exhausted and completely depleted. That is not the best time to really tap into that resource because it's just like you have nothing there, right? So when you're supported and you really do take care of yourself and, take sleep when the baby sleeps, for example, eat, get all your small meals in throughout the day, like just really you feed yourself, you rest, you do the things that you have to do and don't do anything else, right? Those first few months, you don't have time or energy to do those other things. But when you're doing that, the intuition is there and very accessible.
Absolutely. I also think it's important to communicate with the folks who are going to be supporting you, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, dividing and conquering. Maybe one of you is a night person and one of you isn't. Kind of determining who's going to take what shifts. And, you may not know this ahead of time, what's going to work, but having a sense of what everyone's strengths are and what they can bring to this sort of community sense of care can at least help folks feel like, okay, well, I don't have all the answers, but I know that we've got a team thing going here. And of course, when baby comes and as baby grows and as folks move through the immediate postpartum period, that's going to shift, right? Because it's impossible to know ahead of time what you feel capable of doing and who can sort of tackle what areas of round the clock care. So it not only takes some dividing and conquering, but also revisiting what's working, what's not working, and being flexible and open with the folks who are helping you, so that you all can bring your best skills and your best selves to the situation.
I love that. We all have different strengths. Even in an intimate relationship, there's typically some opposites, right? That created that attraction to start, which means that you and your partner do not have all the same strengths, which is such a blessing. when you have that perspective of like, this is what you're really good at, this is what I'm really good at, and baby needs all of it, right? So this is what you can each bring. And coming from that perspective as a team is going to be so healthy for your family and your relationship, as opposed to like, why can't you do this? Like, I can do it. Why can't you do it? Like if, like pointing fingers or shaming or blame or whatever. One resource I found really valuable was Bringing Baby Home, which was a book really all about really having healthy communication as as intimate partners that are becoming a family, and learning how to positively, healthy communicate when you have needs that aren't getting met, or things that you have concerns around that you do need to discuss, have an adult conversation with your partner, how to do that in a healthy, constructive manner, even though you're stressed and you're exhausted and you're dealing with that fourth trimester, right? Which is stressful. So stress can bring out some ugly sometimes, right? In relationships. And so when you understand that going into it, you can be a little more conscious of like, how can I give feedback and doing it in a healthy way without it being critical or offensive or whatever.
Right. And, we're all human. When we become critical or blaming or, we react, which certainly happens more when we're tired and stressed out and hormonal, coming back
Totally.
and saying, I'm sorry, that wasn't the right way to approach this. Can we talk about it? Right. So giving each other and yourselves the grace to not have any patience sometimes. And I think it's really helpful to have conversations about this beforehand. I know that at some point I'm going to really struggle with lack of sleep or whatever. And please know that if I lash out, it's not personal. I am just really having a hard time. And, so having those conversations, I mean, that's just good relationship maintenance, period. But certainly
It
bringing
is.
baby in the picture, that just kind of quadruples the situation, so.
It really does. And I think that, when people don't have that understanding, like if the relationship's already strained and they're like, well, I'm going to have a baby to fix my relationship. Well, the opposite typically happens, right?
Boy, yeah.
Like it just, and so the reality is that babies don't strengthen relationships, right? But there has to be a conscious effort from both parties to really be like, how do I make this work? How do I support and love my partner? And really, grow myself to give, to be the person that I want to be with this person, to be the good partner for that person. So anyways, I think that, we do see that, marriages can fail after babies. But what we're talking about here is how to really be aware that yes, fourth trimester is hard. It's stressful for baby, for mom, for dad, all the partners. And, what can we do preventively? So what you're talking about, which is my perspective as well with prevention, is these conversations can begin pre-conception, during the pregnancy. These are things that can happen because certainly right after you have a baby, you're not going to have a lot of those heart-to-heart conversations. There's more like you're dealing with emergency, urgent type of stuff, right? Managing.
Yeah, and you're just sort of trying to get through the day, get from one feed to another, which is a very different perspective.
Right.
And I also think that communication with whoever is going to be in your postpartum care circle is important. Setting expectations before baby is born, right? We know who the family members are who are going to create stress or not be able to hold that space, and who are going to perhaps be judgmental or be rough and gruff and maybe have an agenda. And so having conversations with support folks, especially the ones who aren't being paid, right? The professional ones, that's kind of a different relationship, but support family and friends, having conversations with them about what they're able to provide, and does that align with what you need? before the baby
Right.
is born. And
Right.
there are a lot of tasks that don't involve holding the baby, right?
Right.
So
Everybody wants that job.
right. So thinking about that ahead of time, also thinking about the things that are really important to you. Like with some families, having a clean house helps them feel like, okay, things may be chaotic, but my house is clean, so I can function. Right. So if that's a priority, knowing that ahead of time and making arrangements to have somebody come in and clean or vacuum or ask someone, a friend, can you help out with the cleaning, whatever. If there are pets in the family that sometimes are a little high maintenance, making sure someone's caring for them. I can remember with my first baby, I was so grateful. My neighbor took the dog for a walk twice a day, every day. And, it was just around the block and it was 15 minutes, but boy, that made such a difference because I couldn't imagine either me or my husband getting out of the house and walking the dog those first couple of weeks. So things like that. Some folks love to cook. Fabulous. They can bring food. That doesn't give them an automatic ticket to hold the baby, right?
Right.
That means great, bringing food. And, I've even talked with parents who have put a cooler out on the front porch with a sign on it that says, thank you. This is where the food goes. And they pick it up from the cooler and bring it in and cook it. So, finding what folks are capable of and willing to do and how that aligns with your needs can solve a lot of problems once baby comes. A lot of confusion, a lot of emotional stress, and make things sometimes go a little smoother.
Right. It really goes back to just being kind of clear about what you're wanting, what you're looking to create for that fourth trimester, what your boundaries are, who you want support from and how they're supporting you, communicating that everyone's on the same page. So I think so there's basic things that you can list out. You can even put it in writing, right? Who's cleaning the house, who's doing laundry, who's cooking, who's doing night shift, things like that. And then there's going to be things once the baby comes that you didn't even think about, right? And then it's like, okay, I need to find this task is here. And instead of mom immediately being like, I'm going to do it, like, let's think about who we can delegate to, right? Who can help with this task that wasn't even on my radar that needed to get done,
Yep.
For moms that have, this is their second, third, fourth child, then there's a whole multiple child care situation, right? So this is not just the first baby, but it's a newborn with siblings. That's a whole nother layer where that brand new, the mom really doesn't have a lot to give necessarily to those other kids at that moment, right? As she's taking care of a newborn.
And that's something that we talk about in our fourth trimester class, the fourth trimester class that I teach. And also for a private class that I teach for folks who have already gone through birth and are pregnant again and want to sort of prepare for this birth and this baby with some mindfulness. We talk about ways to ease that transition for siblings. And giving them the space to have all the emotions. Anger is not bad. Lashing out about the new baby is not bad. It's just how they're feeling. And anybody who, mindfully raises toddlers knows that you've got to let them have all the feelings, and they tend to get over them more quickly that way. So we talk a lot about how to include siblings in, even if they're, toddlers themselves or a year and a half or 2 years old or whatever, how to include them in baby's life, and how to make time just for them so that they know that they still have their place in the family. They just want to feel like they're still part of everything. And, again, this is a time when it's easy to lash out at the other children because we're tired and, we don't have much patience and we're hormonal. So mindfully approaching that can make a big difference as well. Even a 2-year-old, You can have a conversation with a 2-year-old. The new baby is crying. What do you think the baby wants? What do you think they need? What do you think might help? And you might get some 2-year-old suggestion that doesn't make any sense, but at least they're part of the conversation.
Yeah, they feel included.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's so important. So yeah, there's that adjustment to not only parenting, but also as the family grows, each baby creates a new family, right? So it's all these new dynamics and interpersonal relationships that occur. So I think it's all really fascinating. But I think what I'm really hearing from you is this mindfulness, this preparation, this let's kind of be clear about this is a big life change that's happening for all of us in this family. And what do all of us need, right? Not just baby, not just mom. What does the other partner need? What do the other siblings need? And how can we all step up and really support each other. And I also, even though it's hard work, there can also be the celebration of this new baby and the excitement, the joy, all the other, there's a lot of wonderful, beautiful emotions that are also very specific to that fourth trimester, right? And really being present with those. It's not going to be 24/7, right? But when they're there and you're just with your baby, how you can really just enjoy that. You're not scrolling on your phone. You're not looking at social media. That's not important right now. Your baby is going to grow so quickly and change so quickly. But right now you have this tiny newborn in front of you, and that connection is priceless.
Yep. And when you can foster that connection with siblings as well, the baby and between the baby and siblings, that can help everybody feel a little more heard and seen and validated.
And loved.
Yeah. For a new parent, taking a 15-minute siesta and scrolling through social media might feel like a way to sort of have a sense of normalcy, right, in their life. So, if that's what a new parent feels like they need, making time for that and making sure baby's cared for by somebody else and just closing the door and scrolling through Facebook, if that's helpful. I think that it's important for new parents to ask themselves too, what do I need in this moment? I may need some sleep, but you mentioned sleeping when the baby sleeps. Well, that's ideal, but a lot of people can't do that. So, rather than put the pressure on yourself to sleep, the baby's sleeping for the next hour, I better go to sleep, right? Sometimes it's hard to do that. So what can you do that will help you feel a little bit refreshed and replenished so that when you do come back to your baby, you're bringing what I like to call a good enough self?
I heard that refreshed version. A refreshed version. I mean, I definitely had no problem sleeping during the day when my baby was sleeping. But to be fair, not everyone can take afternoon naps or sleep during the day as much. So, yeah. So what is helpful for you? Having a nourishing meal, maybe someone's watching the baby while they nap and you can take a little walk outside, get some fresh air, right? Do a little yoga stretching. So it's something that is still replenishing yourself, right? It's not depleting. There's not a depletion that's occurring, I would say.
Right.
Right.
Right. Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit more about with the fourth trimester and this navigation, when so what about when partners are the baby's, they're home with their baby and they're recognizing that their needs aren't getting met? How, and it's already, they're in the midst of it. How can they have what's a great way to have these types of, how can they improve their communication? Now they're not pregnant anymore, right? So it's
right.
They're in it.
I am not a marriage therapist, but I was married for 40 years, quite happily, most of the time. And I can say that coming to your partner when you're feeling replenished. Maybe you've eaten, you've maybe had a little rest, you've had a nice big drink of water or that first cup of coffee, and talking about it under those circumstances tends to be less reactionary, right?
Yes,
So,
that is such good advice. And that's just your life's wisdom, right? Like that was your life experiences. And it's so logical. If you're like, oh, I really don't like this about my partner and I'm also already irritated, it's going to come out that way and it's going to trigger and trigger the other person potentially.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And we talk about before reacting, closing your eyes and just taking 5 mindful breaths, right? It doesn't have to be a big meditation session. It's just coming back to the breath, following your breath for 5 or 10 breaths, and then responding, right? And I mean, that's helpful in any situation, right? With a
Yes.
toddler who's driving you crazy, with a coworker who you're having a conflict with, with your partner, whatever, taking that pause to just sort of go within. I'm a big believer in using the breath as an anchor.
Right.
To come into this moment, it kind of gives us some perspective. And, we talk about this in childbirth class too, as ways to cope with labor, right? And to cope with the uncertainty of birth. When we take some time to go inward and follow our breath, and every time our mind wanders, come back to the breath. It's not about the mind not wandering. The work is coming back to the breath. That can make a huge difference in how we respond.
For sure. And you can even do that with a crying baby, right? I think sometimes the crying baby just kind of triggers this like a primitive response of immediate reaction. And majority of the time, that's actually not required, right? We could take a deep breath and really like ground ourselves to then care for this baby.
Yep. And ourselves.
Right.
My pediatrician from many years ago gave me some really good advice. He said, when your baby or your children don't feel lovable, love yourself. And I think that has really stuck with me. And I think that that's a good way to tune into that self-care and that grace to give that we need to give ourselves, is just by slowing down and taking some deep breaths. And, one of the things I think parents, and this is what I wanted to talk about before, one of the things that I think happens with all parents is feeling this pressure to do everything right and to not screw up and bring your best self at every situation, right? And that is a wonderful goal. But can we take that pressure off and just try to be a good enough parent, right?
Right.
Doing the best we can.
Right.
And it comes back to what I was saying before, kind of admitting when we've screwed up, taking that pause to sort of not react, right? To get out of our heads and into our bodies, and remembering that no one is perfect.
Right.
And we're all going to fail our children sooner or later, whether it's as infants or toddlers or teenagers. We are going to not make the mark. And knowing that that's going to happen, hopefully it won't be an unsafe situation, right?
Right.
But knowing that that's going to happen, when it does happen, might it help us feel a little less blaming and self-judgmental. And, when we apologize, even to our infants, our babies, I am so sorry, I just bumped your head, right? We hear ourselves doing something really positive and connective, right? And as our kids grow, they hear us apologizing for something that we've done, and that's what they learn. And,
Yes.
wouldn't the world be a better place if everybody could apologize when they've done something that they know was not safe or was a mistake or whatever, even if it wasn't, deliberate?
Yeah, an accident. It's just really owning up to like I made a mistake. We all do, and but the apology is very huge. I had learned about that in some parenting books, like when my son was, his early toddler years. It continues though, right? But like when he was the Whole Brain Child book was mentioning, like, even when a child's a year old, or probably even possibly younger, but really the toddler age is when they start, I feel like, triggering parents, the tantrums, no. And it will trigger you eventually, even if it's not the first tantrum. Eventually the parent snaps and you react, you yell, you do something that you're not proud of as a parent. And when you get that breath, you catch yourself, then there's an opportunity immediately, ideally, to say, you know what, mommy's sorry. I yelled at you, and that's not how we treat each other, right? Like, you are teaching your children that sometimes things do happen that we're not proud of, but we can apologize. And just because I'm a parent doesn't give me permission to yell and scream at my child, right? That's not okay. That's not being a good human. And so if I want to model that, but also model like that I'm not perfect, right? Because we're not, that's, I feel like, a good way to handle those times that we, when we do mess up. And we don't have to wait till years later, right? We can actually do it right at that moment.
Right. Absolutely. Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think with a newborn, that translates to your relationship with your significant other. Right? I am sorry that I snapped at you, or I grabbed the baby away from you, or whatever is going on, or I grabbed that diaper away because I didn't like the way you were doing it.
Right.
So, the same thing goes with our, the folks who are helping us care for this newborn. So yeah, a little compassion and reflection can go a long way.
A really long way of really being aware, like, wow, I'm not happy with what just came out of my mouth or what I just did. And I'm not going to pretend like it didn't happen. I'm not going to just go on with my life. I'm going to acknowledge it and own up to it. That is adulting, right? Is acknowledging when we make mistakes and asking for forgiveness. And I agree. If more people had the aptitude to do that, we would live in a very different world. Yeah. And we can model that from our children as soon as they're born, even in utero, right? I would say that even when the baby is in utero, they're still aware of the relationship between their parents and the dynamics that are occurring, right? So,
oh yeah, sure.
That's a good time to start practicing.
Absolutely. Maybe that's why it takes 9 months to grow a baby, right? So we have some time to practice treating each other like compassionate humans.
Yeah, with kindness, right?
Yep.
For sure. Well, Colleen, do you have any last thoughts that you want to share with the audience?
I do. I like to remind folks that you are the expert at your baby. There are pediatricians and lots of resources for education and information out there. And, it can be often very overwhelming. And even the most experienced pediatrician doesn't know your baby the way you do. And so I encourage you to remember that you may not feel like it, but you will become soon the expert at your baby, because you're going to be spending 24/7 with that baby. So, and that comes back to listening to that inner voice. I think that is super, that's super helpful and can give you insight into what you need to do next. Listen to the experts, take in what feels right. You'll get a lot of advice from other folks who've, had 5 babies and done this several times and, have been in your shoes, at least theoretically, but they're not the expert at your baby. What's sustainable for you and your family? That's what's important. And whether it's about feeding, whether it's about sleeping, co-sleeping, baby wearing, what is sustainable for you and your family?
Right.
That's real important.
That is really important. Every family is unique. So it will look different for every person.
And it's so easy to compare ourselves on social media to other folks. And to think that we're doing it wrong because someone else is doing it differently and it's working for them. Right. So tune in when we tune into our bodies and kind of go inward, that can help us know what we need for our babies. So I think that that's really important.
Well said, Colleen. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Thank you, Laura. I've really enjoyed talking with you. I love the work you guys do, and I'm so happy to be collaborating with you.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode with the conversation that Colleen and I had about the fourth trimester. And I think the message is really clear that the fourth trimester is not only a pretty intense adjustment for the parents, but it is for the baby as well, as the baby's acclimating to being outside of the womb for the first time and learning their environment and adjusting to all the different things that go along with being a baby. So it's an amazing perspective that I'm really grateful that Colleen shared. And it's a different way to look at how to relate and empathize with your baby if they're crying and helping to meet those needs that are not only physically, but emotionally as well. And if you want to learn more about Colleen, her classes, if you're in the Hoboken, New Jersey area, she's offering in-person classes out of my practice, Hoboken Family Chiropractic and Wellness in Hoboken. And you can get more information on her websites at twodoulasandYou.com. She also has some virtual classes as well, so you can live anywhere in the country and participate learning about childbirth education, lactation while you're still pregnant, so you're more prepared for breastfeeding, as well as learning about newborn care before you give birth.